Hello, everyone. Thank you for coming. It's a real honor for a tiny little team like ours to be given a chance to speak to all of you like this, and we hope you find this session entertaining and informative. Let's get started, come rain or shine. Today, we will be doing a postmortem on the download-only title for PlayStation 3, Rain. I'm Ken Suzuta, and I'm the producer. And I'm Yuki Ikeda, director. Some of you probably aren't familiar with Rain, so let's start with a quick clip to give you a sense of the game. Although a new IP, Rain received a lot of attention around the world for its invisible player character and surreal setting of a rainy city at night. Its elegant graphics and music were also praised, and the game was honored with many awards and nominations. But all that being said, the actual production was anything but beautiful. We made mistakes after mistakes and even had to make some major course corrections along the way. That might explain why production took almost 3 years. Today, we'd like to give you an honest look at the development of Rain, telling you things we probably can't repeat back at the office. We'll start with how we came up with the Rain's concept and then continue with the events that led to the major directional shifts. We'll end with the problems that remained. This presentation is divided into 8 chapters, just like Rain's story. And after a 40-minute presentation, we'd like to leave 15 minutes for questions. First, let me give you some background on the Rain team itself. Rain began as a project by members of PlayStation Camp before later becoming a collaboration with Acquire Corporation. For those who haven't heard of it, PlayStation Camp is a program run by the Sony Computer Entertainment Worldwide Studios, Japan studio, to seek out new creators. Its goal is to gather a group of sharp-minded creators to produce exciting new games together with SCE, regardless of whether those creators have previously made previous game production experience. The hope is that these creators will produce thoroughly unique games, different from anything else in the market. It's no coincidence that this program started in 2006 right at the start of the global indie games boom. Some of the games born on the PlayStation Camp program include Echochrome, Tokyo Jungle, No Heroes Allowed, and Patchwork Heroes. And no matter whether the game was based on homage, fashion, pure comedy, or a complete denial of gaming rules, we just wanted to make games with one novel, totally out there aspect. What became the RAIN project was no exception either. It began with the desire to surprise players. First, we divided up everything that makes up a game into tiny little parts. I'm not just talking about just superficial things like the game's world or how much action it has. Instead, we picked apart core elements like the relationship between the player and the controller. The closer to the core we got, the more prominent the changes would be. And that's when we came up with the idea of a player character you couldn't see. Forcing people to control something they can't see seemed like the ultimate taboo in game development. Once we had the concept in place, we had to figure out how to turn it into a product. We had two options available to us. We could either make the game an action puzzle or an action-adventure game. In other words, it was a choice between emphasizing logic or emotion. Both ideas had their strengths, so it was a tough decision. We decided to pull out a few key words to help us decide what might work well with invisibility. Tons of ideas came out of these brainstorming sessions. We mixed and matched a lot of elements and even got so far as to come up with the overall game ideas. But it soon became clear that making a game where you can't see your character is close to impossible. And why? For example, a side-scroller where you can't see the character. Or a puzzle action game where you can't see the character. And a 3D action game where you can't see the character. Obviously, you couldn't play any of these games. So we tried to find a way to make something invisible visible. And that's when rain came to us. Rain falls in a straight line and splashes away at the point where it hits something. If there's an obstacle in the way, the rain can't affect what's below the obstacle. It's such a logical setup. It's so logical, in fact, that it seemed like the puzzler route was the obvious choice. But we took a step back and decided to think about rain as something more than a logic symbol. That's when we realized the following things. Rain falls on everyone equally, no matter who or where you are. Rain cuts out other noises, leaving only hushed raindrops. In other words, rain isn't just logical, but deeply emotional. Rain allows you to see what's invisible. Together with that idea, words describing the game world started to pour out. Solitude, night, boy, girl, an empty city. The various elements started to come together, and our vision for this finished game became clear. We decided we wanted to create a fantasy world where an invisible boy appears in a nighttime city. Now it was time to enter the prototype creation phase. Once we decided on the game's direction, coming up with a visual style was easy. We wanted it to take place in a European city in the recent past. We wanted a boy and a girl, each 10 years old, as characters, and we wanted them to struggle against strange monsters. As a rule, the invisibility was meant to be a fantasy aspect, so we purposely portrayed other aspects as ordinary. After putting everything together, we created a concept movie at the end of 2010. Well, this brings up memories. At the time, we were overlaying 3D models onto 2D art using projection mapping. The quality was good, but it was unfortunately a highly impractical method. We would have to draw every map by hand, and any later tweaks to the level design would have been impossible. We dropped the idea quickly. Instead, we used modeling to create the maps, but we never really liked how the real-time lighting worked or looked. So we created the layouts in a 3-step process: fixed shadowing, reflection, post-effects. By using hand-drawn textures, we were able to pursue a unique visual style that strongly deviated from photorealism. I think it's in particular the reflections came out quite well. As for the gameplay, it was a trial and error process. We realized that without adding certain mechanics, we couldn't take advantage of the themes of invisibility or rain. We also learned that particular objects would be necessary to let the player character show and hide himself. To test all these possibilities, we experimented with a large number of UI elements and effects. What was produced was a prototype for a stealth action game. This movie was made around that time, during the winter of 2011. As you can see, there are a lot of elements that scream video game as compared to the final version. And I have no idea. No, I don't know what we were thinking about that music. Still, we have a monster chasing down a boy. We have fear and isolation and a cruel world. And we have cold pounding rain. The basic contours of the game had taken shape. But then everything changed. On March 11, 2011, Japan was hit by a massive earthquake. In a single day, countless lives were lost. For weeks afterward, horrifying images were shown over and over again on the news. Suddenly, our silly little game didn't seem all that important. What's worse, every day at work, we had to watch two little children struggle and suffer under battering rain. All I can think was, who in the world would play something as depressing as this? Am I prepared to take responsibility for the sadness this game could cause? The story's conclusion might be too painful for people. With these doubts bouncing around my head, I simply couldn't go on with the project. The damage from the earthquake was severe, but reconstruction proceeded at a rapid pace. The pace was so fast, in fact, that we were left behind in its wake. Amid this, the PlayStation camp leader, Mr. Yamamoto, gathered the team together one day. He declared, "Times are tough now, but people are going to need fun in their lives again someday. And when that happens, they're going to need the entertainment we make." Sometimes entertainment does hurt people. It can cause sadness and pain. Entertainment has the power to move people's hearts after all. With that in mind, we had an epiphany. All we have to do is design the game so it moves players the way we want it to, so it makes them feel the way we want them to. I decided to create a whole new Rain, a game that wasn't about loneliness or sadness. I wanted to make a game that might be unsettling and might even be a little painful, but also tells a beautiful story about the night. The first thing we did after the project was restarted was change the direction of the game design. Up until that point, we had been focusing on negative concepts like isolation, loneliness, and now we wanted to strengthen more positive ones like curiosity and bravery. Of course, a game set in Night City will have its fair share of fear and isolation, but we refined the graphics to produce a surreal world that players would want to explore, and not just a scary one. We introduced lighting to produce a night that wasn't just darkness. We removed the UI and other overtly game-like markers. We added text that floats in air to tell the story the way picture books do. And we selected Claude de Lune to serve as the primary motif. We used camera work to emphasize space. And finally, we added a post-effect blur to the entire screen. I think we were particularly successful in creating a magical night setting by placing unusual pink and yellow-green light sources throughout the environments to keep them from being covered in shadow. The game's presentation was strongly influenced by the picture books I was reading to my daughter at that time. In the opening and the ending, you'll see this. And that was around the time when we decided to add watercolor cinematics. You'll see them in both the opening and the ending because we wanted people to finish the game on a high note. Everything was coming together, and we started to see the light at the end of the tunnel. We had the general outline of the game, and the prototype was completed. It was now time to begin mass production of assets. But as we constructed each level, the need to create a realistic city became a major burden. I blame the use of level designs based on white boxes in the game engine. The level designers would insert placeholder white boxes into the prototype levels as they were being constructed. Then, the designers would turn those boxes into real objects and place them on the map. I think this is a very typical workflow. For example, here's an object of a particular size. Our designers need to design, and the model is as something you might find in the city. An object this size might be turned into a vending machine, for example, or a small kiosk like this. Next, we move to an object this size. It's bigger and has been plopped right into the middle of the street. This makes things tougher for the designers, but they will probably turn it into a car or something similar. Something like this. Now the object is even bigger. It's basically a wall. Sure, mixing things up like this might be interesting from a level design perspective, but this causes a huge problem for the designers who have to convert this into a real-world object. What in the world is they supposed to turn this into? Oftentimes, we simply turn these objects into real boxes. Wooden boxes have become a video game cliché, and I admit they're convenient. But we were aiming for a living, breathing city. No real city would be filled with wooden boxes to provide height differences. So in other words, we trapped ourselves in a corner by considering level design solely through the lens of game mechanics. We knew the kind of gameplay we wanted, but we didn't think about the gameplay, where the gameplay would happen, and how the player would feel when it did. With that revelation, we decided to make storyboards, even for the puzzle sections, and work to add flavor to each scene. That allowed us to consider design and mechanics at the same time, and thus bring life to our city. Of course, sometimes even that didn't work, and when it didn't, all we could do was fight back with tears and throw the idea out. Or ask the designers to do whatever they could come up with, these giant box-like objects. All these techniques let us improve the gameplay atmosphere balance by leaps and bounds. On the other hand, I also think we lost a lot of the simple fun found in the pure game mechanics. At this point, production was far along and we hadn't done any external testing, so it was time to do a play test. Here's some video from the test. You'll see right here at the beginning of Chapter 1. I have to say we were shaking our boots as we watched, but we had improved the presentation and we filled the gameplay with twists and tricks. It was time for the players to have some fun. Take a look. He's dying almost every single time. And as you can see, The player doesn't really know where to go next, and they just keep going in circles and in the same place, and they die. You're supposed to actually go towards the bottom right. And then some people, they ended up coming back to where they first started. So basically going in circles. And this is a survey that we had them fill out. Way to go, guys. Your game is crap. Ouch. So the people had spoken. There were tons of negative feedback from people who said the game was hard to play, who couldn't see where they were, and who could die immediately. We had expected to an extent, but now we had serious problems in our hands. After analyzing recordings of the playtests, players' impressions, and gameplay videos, it became clear that many of the problems were rooted in the game's camera. Rain's camera followed the old Resident Evil model. The camera angle switched automatically when you reached a certain location. In a game where it's already hard to keep track of where you are, if the character is invisible after a camera switch, you'll definitely lose him. To solve this problem, we fleshed out all the spots where this could happen and fixed them. We went to great efforts to avoid crossing the imaginary line, same as in movies. Additionally, we designed layouts to guide players in the proper direction in places where they might lose sight of their destination. In areas where we wanted to pull back for a wide view, we reduced the number of enemies to ensure players would be safe even if they lost their bearings. We also eliminated camera switches in places where the character is completely invisible. Finally, we removed camera easing while the character is totally invisible to allow linear responses to controls. Thanks to Rain's unique setup, we developed a whole slew of new techniques. Even so, we ended up having to manually tweak all 200 camera locations in the game. It was an immense task and one that could have been avoided. Still, our efforts were rewarded. By the final playtest, almost all the complaints about the camera and game controls had disappeared. As the project neared completion, we put the final touches on all aspects of the game. Things like final level design and motion tweaking, background model reduction, material integration, bug fixes, localization, and above all, performance. It goes without saying that all final tweaks were directly connected to the performance. Rain was running on every last bit of memory, so performance would be affected by even a slight camera angle change. In the end, we used brute force to find all the places where the system couldn't maintain 30 frames per second. Then we would reduce models into single meshes or unified materials. Alternatively, we'd split models up and hide portions of them, or even go camera by camera and manually alter objects we wanted to hide. It was grueling work. Of course, right around that time, the PS4 was announced with 8 gigs of memory. Then why are we trying to shove everything into 256 megs? We joke bitterly over drinks. And yet, we did it. The game was finished in August of 2013, and it had a simultaneous worldwide release in October of the same year. We are particularly proud of the lack of bugs in the finished product. Our FQA score was 0. 0, that's 0. That was due to the hard work of our engineers and designers, and I can't thank them enough. We received a lot of awards and praise for this experiment of ours. Still, some problems remained. I've divided them up into 2 major categories. First one, lack of challenge. By trying to get rid of gameplay that placed too much of a burden on players, we got a lot of complaints that the game wasn't hard enough. We heard this especially from core gamers. For the second playthrough, we added elements that provide background to the story and world. However, since the actual difficulty doesn't change, players probably didn't see any gameplay reason to replay the game. On the other hand, adding more kinds of gameplay or additional solutions to the stages would have required manpower our team simply didn't have. Instead, we should have considered other means to improve the game's challenge. And second, trouble relating to the story. The themes were presented were not the ones that everyone related to. Some people got what we were trying to say immediately, while others were baffled. For the most part, we conducted playtesting in Japan. So perhaps we should have run some tests overseas and included a broader range of cultural perspectives in the final product. The RAIN project started out as a desire to challenge the gaming mainstream. However, we discovered the hard way just how difficult it is to do that. Indeed, we learned that established game mechanics got that way because they work and are effective. That meant we had to give up on many of the new things we were trying to do. However, it ended up being a learning experience for us, and despite everything, I still think we made an excellent game. Lots of people there talk about rebelling against the system. They say they want to invent something entirely new. And take it from us when we say that's easier said than done. But it's worth a try. It's worth being bold. Because even if invention doesn't work out, innovation isn't half bad either. And if you ever need advice on making game with invisible characters, you know where to find us. Thank you so much. Okay, so we're going to be opening this up for Q&A. If there are any folks in the audience with questions, please walk up to the mic. And we won't be doing simultaneous translation for this, so please excuse us for a little bit of a gap in between the question and the answers. Thank you.
Q&A になりますので、マイクの方へ、質問ある方。
Don't be shy. You guys can come up. They won't bite.
My question is, why your team choose Unity as developing engine, and what's the most efficiency of Unity, and what's the most what part you don't think is really good to use?
ユニティを使いました。
なぜ使って
なぜ使ったか。
で、いい
なるほど。
長所と短所ですね。
もう、これ、皆さん、
So the answers are pretty simple. So the pros, the best part, why we went with it was because prototyping was really quick. We got to a point where we can call something a prototype rather quickly. But on the flip side, the con is that from that point moving forward, it took us a very long time to get to completion.
I have a question about, you were talking about the mood of the game and that you didn't want to have a depressing game. Last year I worked on a game that made me very depressed, that had depressing themes, and I just wanted to ask, did you feel like you achieved your goal to have an upbeat message at the end of your game? Like, do you feel like you got over that hump?
そうですね。
So obviously some time has already passed by since we, basically said this is it, this is the finish, and we're going to wrap it up and ship it as a game. So to be quite honest, I think because I'm not there back in that, situation and time has passed, I can't say for sure, but given the situation and what we are feeling and our surroundings at that time, I think that is the max, the best that we could have done. And at the same time, turning around that theme, to curiosity and bravery, that was the best we could have delivered.
Hi, I'd like to ask about Project Camp. How many people are involved with that? What kind of a program is that within the studio? What motivations are there within the studio as a whole to support new ideas and smaller, newer projects?
Okay, so first off, currently at the moment, PlayStation Camp is not in sort of operation. They don't have any active projects right now. So the goal is that we would bring in either scout or have them apply to this program. But the goal is that we would bring in folks from outside of the gaming industry. So people who said, they've always wanted to make games, but maybe it was a hobby, or they're from maybe very similar or related, nearby industries, but never had game development experience. We would work together and make games that would, satisfy and fulfill that goal. We would support them, and then after making, let's say, 2 or 3 of those games, you would, quote unquote, sort of graduate from the program. So it's essentially kind of going from amateur or having that as a hobby. So you're a hobby game developer, and by the time you graduate, we give them a sense of, okay, now you've had your experience and you can have your career as a game development professional.
Hi there. First of all, thank you for the presentation. I also have a question about the mood experience with the game. Have you ever play tested during the development at the point that you almost shut it off? I don't know if I'm saying it right, but have you ever considered what players actually experienced with the game, the mood of the players? I don't know if that's a.
Let me repeat the question, if that's okay. So are you asking if they actually play tested, not necessarily the game mechanics, but actually asked for their opinion on the mood of the game? Okay. So at the time of play testing the game, play mechanics and features and such, we actually did ask for our play testers' opinion on the mood, the theme, the world, the setting. So we were doing that at the same time, and we actually had a very sort of wide range, a wide age range in terms of play testers. And what we found out was there were folks who would say, I appreciate and am interested in this world and setting, but the gameplay is very hard. It's difficult for me. And so, gathering or getting that feedback, we would then consider or discuss about, okay, do we lower the difficulty just to accommodate, these people who are interested in our world but are having a hard time trying to get through the game. So that type of feedback we actually did have going back and forth throughout our testing period.
Hi, thank you for your presentation. My question is about the rain. Did you try to give the rain a personality? Maybe sometimes the rain is not so heavy, or maybe there's something different about it in a particular level. And maybe did you think about the player's relationship to the rain? Could it hurt or help in certain cases? Thank you.
So when we think about rain, and you're just standing when it's raining, you're cold and you might feel sad and lonely. It is very sort of heavy or kind of just sad, period. But we didn't want it to just end there. We did want to bring out some sort of beauty that is found in rain and to have the players feel that beauty. So how it works in our game, as you may know, since maybe you have played it, you disappear when it's, not raining, and you actually appear. You can see yourself when it is raining. So that means as you progress throughout the game, you build a relationship, essentially, with the rain, and it kind of starts to, you have a bond or relationship, and it starts to sort of wrap you in a way. And I think that is sort of integrated nicely in our story. And as you get obviously closer to the end, I'm hoping that came through, or that was communicated to the player. I think it went pretty well in that sense.
How did you communicate the vision of the game to the team, and then how did you maintain it throughout so that it remained a consistent tone, and were there any lessons you learned from doing that while you were working on the game? Thank you.
So I thought it was clear to my team trying to communicate my vision because it's in my head, but I was, still getting asked relatively frequently or from time to time pretty often, so what happens and why and the hows and the whats. And so, I kept on repeating myself, and I just didn't get why they weren't getting it. So I had to really break it down to the details. And then at some point, I put it into a document form, and I want to say maybe it was even halfway through production. So the lesson that I learned is that I should have probably done that in the first place. And so that was probably a mistake on my part to not be able to get to that level of understanding with everyone on the team at the very beginning. Okay. All right. Thank you very much. Thank you, everyone, for coming.